Werner, welcome.
Don't believe anything you hear from Paddy. Yeah?
Well, I've seen the rankings, and
Okay.
I think he's all right. It's been a little bit more than 10 years since Amazon got everybody to scratch their heads announcing this thing they were doing called AWS, or I guess it wasn't called that back then. But give us an overview of what the landscape of the cloud looks like today.
Well, I think, cloud has shifted quite a bit from, let's say, the earlier years. If you look at the first services that we were bringing out, they really focused on the true infrastructure pieces that most technology companies needed to have: compute, storage, databases, network, security. Over time, we learned from many of our customers that there are many more pain points in their organizations that are not differentiating for them. For example, everybody needs to do search. And so that meant that every organization, search is something that needs to be in every website, in every application. And it means that they were all running Solar and Lucene, trying to do that at scale. And it was just a pain point. It's another cost of doing business that was not crucial competitive differentiator. And so more and more we've been looking at all these other services that we could build for our customers, and whether that is in search, whether it's in analytics, whether it's in mobile development, whether it's IoT, whether it's in development services, all these different kind of areas. We have well over 80 services targeting the full spectrum. You want to develop IoT applications, you want to do analytics in real time driven out of IoT. All these kind of patterns are things that cloud can support these days.
And who are the users? Because you started very much with startups, the folks in this audience. How has it changed?
Well, maybe the better word instead of startup is to say we focused on internet scale companies, or at least companies that wanted to drive internet scale. Because one of the precursors actually of cloud was that when we opened up our catalog API, which we done something in 2001, 2002, something like that, we saw many young businesses being built on top of the Amazon catalog. And as soon as they had to scale, as soon as they became successful, they all started to stutter. They all needed to get massive investment to buy hardware and things like that. So the things that we really promised from the early days on is that you could have storage at internet scale. You didn't have to think about the scale anymore. So, but pretty quickly, almost when we had launched EC2 in the fall of 2006, enterprises figured out that this was way too good a deal for them as well. Although it has shifted in terms of reasoning around that, I think the whole world of startups and enterprises have sort of dramatically shifted since 10 years. I mean, if you look now at startup companies that we still consider startups, I mean, Airbnb, Dropbox, Spotify, Tinder, whatever, these are household names today. They didn't exist 5 years ago or 6 years ago. They couldn't have grown up without cloud. But I almost don't consider them to be real startups anymore. I mean, Airbnb, 450,000 people a night are spending a night in a room brokered by Airbnb. Half of the audience probably here has an Airbnb room somewhere in town. And so without cloud, these companies couldn't have grown up. But what you see, for example, with Airbnb is that where do they compete with? They compete with the big hotels, who are also realizing now that their competition is no longer going to come from the other big hotels. They may come from much smaller players. So they need to become as agile as these startups are.
And so how are they using the cloud to do that?
So, for example, they are, a good example is, for example, Kempinski, very high-end hotel chain, the luxury hotels. Sure. They have figured out that in the luxury hotel section, the competition is all going to be about digital services delivered to their customer. If you come into one of your hotels, you get a tablet that actually controls basically anything in your hotel room, that you can connect with all the different pieces of the hotel. Wherever you are, you can get a butler to yourself. And so they have decided to go all in on the cloud because they want their engineers to focus on what differentiates them instead of what is sort of different, what is the same that they have to do. There was a great paper many years ago by Nick Carr in Harvard Business Review called IT Doesn't Matter. And he didn't mean that IT didn't matter. It meant that at a certain level, IT is not a competitive differentiator. And you should focus on things that differentiate yourself. Take, for example, so there's many e-commerce companies running on top of AWS, even though Amazon, of course, is somewhat of a player there as well. But in Germany, for example, Zalando is definitely the big competitor towards Amazon. Also runs on AWS, which is great because it then means that you can compete on the services delivered to your customers instead of the competition on hardware.
Do you get pushback? Do you get nervousness from a retailer who's trying to use an AWS today?
I think probably 5, 6 years ago, much more than today.
Because
I think everybody
what
starts to realize that we could only run a platform like this if everybody's treated equal. And they see that also coming back in sort of, sometimes we deliver new functionality specifically asked for by one customer. For example, FINRA, which is in the US, the government institution that tracks all the market data. So all the data from all the stock markets flow into this one place. They're analyzing that. Of course, it's highly sensitive data, the way that they're doing that. They had a number of very specific requirements around that. When we build that for them, everybody gets this. There's nothing that we built on our platform that is unique for one or the other. By the way, at our scale, if you would have a line in the code that says, if Netflix go right, if Amazon go left, that doesn't really work like that, yeah? And so companies like Netflix and like Zalando and others, or Kfid, or all the other players could only live on this platform if they would be truly egalitarian.
Okay. Is the rate of adoption or the types of folks who are adopting different in Europe in any material way from the rest of the world?
In Europe, I think something that you see that has nothing to do, I think, with cloud by itself. If you look at the R&D investments that mid-sized to semi-large enterprises are doing here in Europe, it's significantly less than what we see in the US. I think the US has had a much longer history of using technology as a competitive differentiator, or really driving digital platforms. And as such, there's a natural sort of slower moving area in that point, to actually move to sort of a more digital world. It's sort of natural in the way that they've been sort of investing in these areas. It's nothing to do with cloud by itself or sort of culturally. It is sort of a longer history in making these kind of investments. Although I do see here in Europe happening exactly the same thing as anywhere else in the world, is that companies are starting to realize that the competition is not going to come from the other enterprises, it's going to come from young businesses. I mean, look at financial services. Yeah? I mean, it's some of these companies that are being built on AWS create complete new banks. Take, for example, Mondo in the UK, number 29 in Germany. But you have also radically new models showing up. Klarna from Northern Europe that has a very different sort of credit model around it. PayPlug just launched in France. All of these companies are competing with traditional financial services institutions. Now, the financial services by now start to realize that if they don't change their ways, if they don't start to move as fast as that these startups are moving, it will be death by 1,000 cuts.
So are there advantages for those types of startups beyond the sort of the ability to scale as you go that allow them to go after these, disrupting the established players?
Absolutely. So things that we've seen is that it's not just that cloud makes sort of the compute world or the services world egalitarian, or maybe even because they're so young and have a greenfield and able to exploit these things much better. Because we've been able to put all this effort in, for example, certification. So many of our services are HIPAA certified, which is the Healthcare Information Protection Act, or financial services certified. That makes that suddenly startups in the healthcare section have much lower hurdles to take to actually be building healthcare systems or healthcare businesses than they had in the past. In the past, it was almost impossible because you had to certify your complete stack from hardware to operating systems to everything. It was a huge cost. That cost is taken away. So now you see complete new insurance companies popping up, like Oscar Helft, for example, in New York. A completely new online healthcare insurance company built from the ground up on top of AWS.
If you're thinking about advantages, how would you rate things like speed, growth, savings what are the biggest, where do you get the most bang for your buck?
Well, it depends, of course, what type of company you are. I think everybody always, I mean, cost is always a point for anybody. Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to spend more than that they like to spend. And we're fine with that. We often help our customers sort of re-architecting themselves such that they can keep complete control over cost at the minimum level. For us, this is a long-term business. We really, for example, want to see startups becoming successful. Definitely in the enterprise section, for them at this moment, the biggest deal is really moving fast. To be able to take all these hurdles away that they had in their old style. So often I think about, so lean manufacturing, the principles of lean apply very much to cloud. So one of the big deals in lean is eliminate wait states. The fact that you no longer have to wait for resources. In the past, in enterprises, it might have taken 6 months before you could get access to capacity. You had to plan ahead. That means that you're not going to do experiments if you have to plan ahead. If you want to move fast, you have to be able to have resources on demand and be able to release them when you no longer need them. So I think for many companies at this moment, speed of execution is absolutely crucial. Combine that, definitely think for many startups as well, is the ability to go global with just a click of a button. You develop your applications here in Dublin or Frankfurt region, or soon also in the UK and in France, here in Europe. You've developed that application there. You want to do it in Australia, you want to launch customers there. You want to do it in Japan. It's no longer that you have to do data center negotiations there. You just drop your code there, push a button, and you're off to the races. I think that's quite a few companies. Take, for example, here in Portugal, a number of startups here are not targeting the Portuguese market. They're targeting a European market or a worldwide market. Or take, for example, Israel. Israel is full of young, very aggressive, big growing startups. None of them target the Israeli market. Yeah, and so they're all using AWS to really have their customers on a global base. So I think only having to pay for what you've used is definitely, everybody likes that at a minimum point. But the ability to move fast and go global and not having to worry about all this pesky, heavy lifting you have to do is really sort of are the drivers.
Let me switch gears a little bit and get a little technical. Computing has gone from client servers, mainframe, all these shifts. The cloud is very much a centralized model. We're going now to a world where there are a gazillion of devices out there, sensors, IoT, you name it, autonomous vehicles. In many cases, the compute is going to happen on the edge of the network, not in the center. How does it change the role of the cloud, the programming model, how things are going to get built going forward?
Well, I think it's hard to generalize. Let's first take that some pieces. I think still there are things happening, for example, in autonomous vehicles, that you may want to operate on the vehicle itself, because you just latency, speed of light is still, it exists. Yeah? That's something we haven't been able to get out of the way yet. But what you can see, for example, is that you will run your massive machine learning algorithms and your data processing in the cloud. It will generate a model. You load the model onto the device and you access it there locally. That's, for example, one of the patterns that we definitely see happening. Yeah, and of course people want to have a sort of a unified programming model around it, and we'll see whether we can actually reach that over time. Because many things that are now hardware, that used to be hardware and deeply connected, are now sort of decentralized components. So take, for example, all these massive tractors from John Deere. Yeah, John Deere has a story now around what's called the gentleman farmer. Yeah, the farmer no longer sits on his tractor, he sits actually in his office. At the farm, looking at massive screens of all the IoT devices around his farm that are actually all streaming there, where he gets his insight on. But on the tractors itself, you see local actions happening as well.
It took your rivals almost 10 years to realize you were onto something big. And now you're being chased by Microsoft, by Google. Were you surprised, first of all, how long it's taken?
Yes, because I think anybody that had a good ear to the ground with their customers should have realized that this is really what they want. Yeah, I think, and I've been on the receiving end from many of these traditional IT vendors as well. You know, I had to write massive big checks up front before I could get access to these databases, or the only way to drive costs down was to make very long-term contracts. I think everybody was getting sick and tired of that. And especially because it forced you into a resource model that was absolutely outdated. Yeah? If I mention, so you acquire resources on demand, you release them and you no longer use them, use other core competencies, pay only for what you use. That seems like a cloud story. It's not. In all our other parts of our businesses, and whether it's HR or manufacturing, we were already doing that for decades. It's just IT was just so stuck behind because traditional IT vendors held us hostage. And so when we started to build the cloud, we also want to radically change the business model that went with it. Only pay for what you've used, and the whole story with it. So I still think that it takes a long time to actually become successful in this business. And this great quote that Jeff uses, there is no compression for experience. Yeah, much of this you have to live through to actually get to the level of where we are. And so many of the other players that will enter this market will have to go through the same growing pains that we've gone through. And it just takes time. We have one major advantage that I think many of these other companies don't have. We come out of a company that has made to be the Earth's most customer-centric company as its main motto. And so we try to take that motto into our technology division as well. And that means that we create a very different relationship with our customers than many of the traditional IT players had or still have.
So these rivals are going after the same customers you're going after. How's it change what you do every day?
It's so early in this whole story. I mean, I'm not really sure what the total IT budget is. I mean, trillions of dollars. Yeah, and so I think we're still much more in a phase where working with companies to get them onto the cloud instead of competing against each other for the same set of customers. That would be silly. Yeah, I still think e-commerce is the same. I'm not looking towards competing with other e-commerce companies. I'm looking to get more people to shop online. Mm-hmm. So we're way more, I think, looking at what are the kind of things we can do for customers and help, for example, these mass migrations happening that we see happening that now large enterprises are willing to do into the cloud, much more than looking at competition. But looking at competitors, doing a competitor following strategy is a good strategy. It's just not us. We're so laser focused on customers that all of our teams have their own section of customers that they're working with. Each of them running out on their own pace, delivering things as soon as we have them ready. That's why sometimes it looks a little bit chaotic in terms of the way that we're launching features and things like that. And I think this year already we launched 780 new main features and services, purely because that's the feedback we're getting from our customers, and that's where we're focusing on.
One final question, very quick, because we're out of time. Where do you think we are? A lot of tech markets go on a hockey stick curve. Where are we on that curve? Is it?
I have no crystal ball, of course, that's one thing. But I definitely feel that for cloud, we haven't hit this hockey stick yet. We see early signs coming. For example, a company like GE, General Electric, is moving 9,000 workloads over to AWS, closing 30 of the 34 data centers. Companies like Time, Intuit, all of them are making mass migrations into the cloud. But I think that's just the beginning. I mean, right. These are very, very forward-looking companies. GE, it's very interesting. Jeff Immelt made this quote from, one night you go to bed as a manufacturing company, the next day you wake up as a software and analytics company. They realize that they have to transform themselves just to survive. Otherwise, they won't be there in 10 to 15 years from now.
Okay.
And we see that other companies are following that lead as well, and that will create a real hockey stick.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're out of time.
Thank you, guys.